Welcome to our community conversation with the theme Land Acknowledgement and Invisibility, a Cure. Today, our live and interactive virtual program offers a space to incorporate more complete narratives about the Native American nations in Maryland, including reparative processes for close to 12,000 Native residents in Prince George's County. I am Kirsten Grunberg, the supervisor of the Youth Services Department of the Hyattsville Library, and I will be your host today. Please allow me to introduce our very special guest speaker, Mr. Rico Newman. Mr. Newman is a member of the Elders Council of the Choptico Band of Piscataway Indians. He retired from a career as a cultural information specialist at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American Indian and spent 6 years serving on the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs. He currently devotes time to the Acknowledgement Foundation as a board member and resides in University Park, Maryland. Welcome, Mr. Newman.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Mr. Newman, we usually like to start our programs with a land acknowledgement, but because of the theme related to land acknowledgements, I was wondering if this would be a way that you would like to start our program or not.
Well, as it would happen, on November the 1st, they had the Native American Heritage Month opening event held at University of Maryland, College Park. And I had the pleasure and privilege of being the guest speaker, and they asked me to speak on land acknowledgement. Not give a land acknowledgement, but to speak on what it is, what it should be, where it should be going, and what the expectations are from the Native communities from having all these land acknowledgements being done. They're done mostly in educational institutions. There are some private organizations that do land acknowledgements, county governments. I haven't heard any in Maryland, any county governments in Maryland doing land acknowledgements, but Alexandria, Virginia, and others are doing. I know Montgomery County, not the government, but certain agencies are doing land acknowledgements. But I sort of ended my spiel on the first, stating that I quoted Chief Joseph, where he says that good words are great, but they have to come to something. Otherwise, it's just patronizing. And we had a great day at the university, met with the college, with the university's president, and we're looking forward to developing a working relationship to move forward, to look into some of the nuts and bolts of what isn't working and what we can do to make a better relationship between the tribe and the educational institutions. We like land acknowledgements. I related to the Fuller Brush Man who gets our foot in the door. And land acknowledgements gives us something to sell. And that's the way we approach it, that it initiates conversation. We can engage in discussion about what that means, with the University of Maryland system being part of the land grant colleges. And a lot of people don't really understand what that is. I direct them on their own to go on there, use these marvelous pieces of technology that we have and look up the Memorial Acts, Morrill, and to see where land grant colleges came from, when, and why Morrill had to do a second act for land grant colleges in the 1890s. The original one, I think, was 1863. But I don't like to give people information. I like for them to get out there and find out for themselves exactly what that entails. Um, Land acknowledgements are great, but when we do it, it's like me telling you something I already know. And we like for organizations and institutions to look behind door number two for themselves and investigate to find out why are they doing a land acknowledgement? What wording should they put into them? And why will they use a particular language to express acknowledging the land? And just how far into that are they willing to go? A lot of people aren't real happy about land acknowledgements. They think you're opening Pandora's box. And to some degree, you very well may be. Because it opens up some old wounds, very old wounds, going back over 300 years. But it's something that has to be done. If something's wrong and you want to cure it, you want to correct it, you have to take a look and see what's going on. Why is it the way it is? And what can you do to make some mid-course corrections and address the concerns of Native people, particularly here in the state of Maryland?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing your points of view regarding land acknowledgements. And so would you feel comfortable if our library system continues to offer land acknowledgements throughout the year, or you don't feel comfortable? Because this is something very important for us to know.
I do. I appreciate it being done, and the more often, the better. I guess the way to say it's in this age of social justice. It can bring some things to people's minds so they're not focused in one direction, and understand that we're I hate to say group of people, but and not the word class comes to mind, but that has wrong connotations. But we don't want to be left out on the edge during this time of what we call a Jedi. We're not talking about the space thing, the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion that's being addressed as part of social justice. And we don't want to be excluded. We'd like to have a seat at the table, but if we can't get a seat at the table, at least let us in the room so that our voice can be heard.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. On a similar note that you just expressed regarding land acknowledgements, and thank you for allowing us to continue offering land acknowledgements if that is something that makes you feel comfortable.
Yes.
And if there's at some point that you would like for us to stop doing them, offering them for any reason, please let us know. There is a comment that I did find that is related to your recent comments, is that land acknowledgements don't challenge us to consider beliefs or learn new things. They simply signal that the speaker is a faithful adherent of an ethical system that audience members presumably share. The signal promotes the speaker's individual's interests by providing the appearance of a shared morality. So, yes, in that regards, I believe that if the conversation is not opening a space to promote healing, to promote difficult conversations about certain topics that you would like to discuss, and in our case as a library system, if it doesn't promote conversations to improve our programs, to improve our services and resources, then that uh, land acknowledgement would seem to be something very limited. Uh, is that something that you would like to comment on, or would tend to agree, or what do you
Well,
think?
yeah, I agree, but I would add to that to use what's in a system in medicine they call it triaging. You know, when you show with certain issues, they have to determine what is the extent of determining what exactly is wrong. In other words, you just can't walk in the door and say, "Hey, I need help," but you need to find out help with what? What's wrong? What happened to you? So it needs to unpack land acknowledgement to find out how did we get where we are, and in terms of triage, we have to find out how we got here in order to make some corrections. Um, a lot of people think, well, you know, you start where you are. Uh, but where are we? You know, when we look around, and I think I used the word invisibility. A lot of people aren't aware that we still exist. Um, you know, I shared with someone earlier that I attended a art show at the Pequot Museum in Connecticut, and there was an array of artists with different disciplines there. And this was back when I was working in a museum, and I was actually doing a paper for that to determine um, would the day ever come when native art would be accepted and be identified as native art without those symbols and emblems that people come to associate with natives. In other words, if there's no feathers in the picture, if there's no horse, no gun, no lance or spear, how are people going to identify you as native without these accoutrements attached to you? Not one artist said that that's ever going to happen. Now, no, it happened. You know, I always use the example of a young man that worked with me. He was on loan to us from the National Geographic. He was doing a study on visitorship at the museum, and his big complaint. He was Hopi, and his big complaint was that here in the nation's capital, people identified him with everything other than being native. He was Asian, he was Hawaiian, he was Filipino, he was everything. Nobody ever stopped to include, oh, are you native? Never asked the question. So that's invisibility to its greatest extent. And it's not that this guy was a mutt like me. I mean, you know, he's one of these people you expect to see in Hollywood movies. You know, if you see West Studi or Adam Beach, because of their roles, you say, okay, they're native. Um, but this guy, not having that kind of notoriety, is just a guy that out here just like I am or anyone else. He's just simply without his identity.
Um, and speaking of invisibility, because it is, as you mentioned, part of our conversation today, I remember that last year you referred to several examples of invisibility, including, for example, the lack of monuments and memorials that represent Native American nations here in PG County. I remember that you also mentioned that in the hallways of our elementary schools that we lack images of Native American historical figures that may affirm to an American Indian child that the school is acknowledging their existence. Today we also may reflect on the invisibility while we're in the middle of this current pandemic. It seems that American Indians and Alaska Natives are invisible on Maryland state website of COVID-19 because they are all lumped into the category of other racial and ethnic groups. So, yes, I don't know if you care to comment on any one of these other examples, or if you prefer to refer to other.
Well, no, I can both see both sides of that issue. When people are trying to determine the impact something like COVID is having in the population, they're going to look at the population where there's the greatest numbers. They're going to look at populations where they can gather the demographics that they need in order to make decisions and find out just what is the impact of this on the population. And of course, they go to those populations that have the greater numbers. And that's going to be the European, the African American, Asian, and Latino. They're getting. I don't know where my wife is. She should get that.
It's okay. We can wait.
Okay. So, when we're looking at the demographics, our population is not great enough that getting numbers from us. And the big issue is, you have organizations among other ethnic communities where they can go straight to them and they can give them some demographics. They can give them numbers and find out what the impacts are. With the Native community, the question is, okay, who are you going to go to get these numbers? Who, if anybody, has their thumb on the pulse of the community where they can tell you that we had X number of cases of COVID, X number of people who have gotten their first, second, or booster shots with the vaccines. We don't have anybody collecting those types of demographics. And if they make an inquiry and find out that they can't get those kind of numbers, they're not going to come back again because, what changed? Hopefully, that's one of the things that we're working on is developing systems where we can garner demographics so that we'll be able to look and tell just exactly what the circumstances and situations are within our community when it comes down to things like COVID or unemployment or high school graduation. You can't go to, at least I've found, you can't go to any politicians and start saying you have a problem unless you can identify the incidence and prevalence of that problem. You just can't go in there and say, okay, we've got type 2 or juvenile diabetes running rampant in our communication. They want numbers. They want to know how many and how prevalent is it within your community. Without that, you can't have a conversation with politicians or people in the medical arena. So, that's something that we as a community have to work on, being able to substantiate what or if issues that we have in order for them to be addressed. Where COVID is concerned, we were able to distribute PPE across the entire community. I can't think of anyone that didn't have access to it. When it came down to people getting their vaccinations for it, we relied on the information that was coming down to us from local health departments, or even, CVS. Whoever was giving out the medication, we would pass that on to the community members as best we could. Not everybody is on social media. We still have people that don't have computers and can't afford the cost of today's smartphones. So it's reaching out. We usually try to reach who we can and hope that they disseminate that information down the line, especially to our elders, to make sure that they get the services that they need. But again, it's a work in progress, and unfortunately, it doesn't happen as quickly as we would like for it to.
Absolutely. Yes. And Mr. Newman, I don't know if you'd like to speak a little bit more about how the pandemic has affected the Native American nations here in PG County and in Maryland. I was reading an article from the New York Times that was mentioning how it was affecting the elders and the loss of knowledge in your nations. I don't know if you'd like to speak a little bit about that, or if you'd like to move on to a different subject.
No, repeat the question again for me, please.
Sure. So in the New York Times, they explained that, excuse me, just one second here, to give you the precise information. Oh my goodness, I believe that I can't seem to locate it at the moment here. Here we go. Here we go. The loss of tribal elders has swelled into a cultural crisis as the pandemic has killed American Indians and Alaska Natives at nearly twice the rate of white people, deepening what critics call the deadly toll of a tattered health system and generations of harm and broken promises by the U.S. government. So this has been one of the terrible effects of the pandemic in our Native American nations, as I understand.
Yeah, well, you have a divide between federally acknowledged tribes, state-recognized tribes. The federal government has mechanisms in place with Indian Health Service and other organs that can get the kind of demographic information from the tribes, whether they're in Alaska or Oklahoma. They have mechanisms in place where they can get those numbers because the tribal people will go to the Indian Health Service offices within their jurisdictions to get those services. And when they go in, they collect information from them, not just from them, but they'll get familial information, etc. We don't have any systems like that here. The closest thing we have is Native American Lifelines, which is in Baltimore. And their resources are very limited, and they don't have the staff or the ability to reach out into all the counties in the state and try to collect the types of figures and stats that would be needed to address it, or even to determine, do we have a problem, how much of a problem, who is it affecting, and how do we get to this and put a dent in it. Very difficult. Many of our elders still live in some of the rural areas of Charles and St. Mary's County. And they don't even have that bus, the Genie or whatever it is that serves in some of those areas. So with their closest adult children having to, go to work, or even if they're working from home, they don't have the time to stop and go get grandma or whatever and carry her all the way up to the county health office, and still, even when you get there, grandma or grandpa might be a little antsy if they have to sit there and wait too long. So, again, the difference here is the federally recognized tribes have a built-in instrument in the Indian Health Service with clinics where the natives can go and get reliable service, and while there, they're collecting data. And so they have that data that they can send up to Rockville, to Indian Health Service's main office, and they can then determine what the extent, what the impact, how prevalent is this issue with those tribes. That's not happening with state tribes. They just don't have the infrastructure to get that kind of service.
I see. Thank you very much for sharing, Mr. Newman. And if I understood correctly, you're looking into ways how to collect that data with your own systems. Is that correct? And not only for the purpose of collecting data uh, during the pandemic, but for other purposes as well.
Yeah, a lot of our people, will tell you straight up, you're being nosy. What do you want that information for? You're coming to them as an individual, not a person from the medical field. You don't have MD behind your name. You don't have a name tag that says you're representing the state or the county health. So if you show up as an individual, it's says, why am I talking to you? What are you going to do for me? You're not connected to the structures that can bring services to them. So it's very difficult to do that. We've even tried to use people feeling they may be more comfortable talking to people within the tribal community rather than someone outside. And we find that we run into the same door, that they're very reluctant to give up information because they don't know where it's going. They don't know what it's going to be used for. If somehow that information is going to come back to cause them the loss of any benefits. So there's a large reluctance, and it's justifiable because we've never been in a position to have to do that. Many of our people would stay away from county clinics, etc., because we had one instance where our tribal chair took her husband, who was an enrolled member, to one of the local health facilities, hospital, and he went in. She filled out the paper because he was very ill. They triaged him, got him straight into service. She fills out the paperwork. And certainly she noted on his paperwork that he was Native American. When he was discharged, his paperwork had him down as African American. Of course, she hit the ceiling. But to his credit, back then, the county executive at that time was Jack Johnson. And he issued a county executive order to all county agencies and departments. If someone that comes in and says that they are X, you don't change it. And I would assume that order is still in effect. But that's the kind of thing we run into. People will judge you based on what they see and what they think. Again, with the issue up in Connecticut, with the artist saying that if you don't have certain things attached to you that identify you as Native, people don't see you as that, and then they make a judgment as to what they think. I've had to deal with it when I carried my son down to Austin, Texas for an internship. I stayed there for a couple of weeks. Everybody's willing to speak Spanish to me because my name is Rico. If I'm in New York, I'm Puerto Rican. If I'm in North Carolina, they think I'm Lumbee. And if I'm in Washington, D.C., I'm a light-skinned African-American brother. So, if you don't have those things attached to you that people will see and recognize, and even then, they'll question your identity. So we have a long road to go, but we're plowing it up as we go and laying it down on a new surface, and I hope that we can make some corrections over time.
Absolutely. And I would like to actually ask how our Prince George's County Memorial Library System may continue supporting resources that are specific to our Native American nations here in Maryland. And because I currently work at the Hyattsville Library, if there are specific resources and programs and services that we may be able to support and help.
Well, I think, I'm remembering now you and I having a conversation because I think at the temporary facilities that you guys are operating out of, I think I talked to you there, and I was almost down on one knee begging that, if you guys would be sure to have the Merlin room in the new facility, because it proved to be a great resource for me when I was doing research and study and being able to go through some of those materials. Um, the state archives, they're currently trying to make some corrections in what they're doing. I found the books and resources at your library more readily available because they were right there. You know, they were physically in front of me. You go into the Maryland Archives up in Annapolis, and you've got to have a mentor who is on your hip. And then you basically are left to what they think they should be pulling. Rather than, you don't have immediate access to anything. You have to rely on somebody else to get that information for you. Their website wasn't a big help, but they're making corrections. I had a talk maybe a couple of weeks ago with the Special Collections Director, and I shared with them my idea. I don't know how far it's going to fly. The Danbury Library in Chicago, I think, is a model. They have within it what's called the Darcy McNichols Center. It was started some years ago by some noted historians, anthropologists. Can't think of. I think his name was Jennings. That has done quite a few books. He was one of the main players in getting them to have one area in the Newbury where any student that was looking into anthropology, that wanted to study Native American history, culture, etc., they wouldn't have to go to the University of Indiana, Illinois, University out in California, pick one, you know, Davis or wherever, and Oklahoma, and you know, unless they had a rich uncle or related to somebody with deep pockets, they didn't have the time to travel all over the country trying to get a little bit of information here, a little there. So they formed that area in the Newbury, Darcy McNichols Center, where if a student is doing a master's or a doctorate, they can go to that one source and be able to stay there as long as they could afford to stay there and do the research that they needed in order to pursue their master's and doctorate or postdoctorate work. The Archives is now considering separating out that Native American documentation and putting it into one place where it would be accessible, and you don't have to go out in the weeds in between everything else and trying to find something specific to Native culture history, to what happened here over the past 300 some years. It would be nice to have that available. One of the things that I pointed out to them that when you say Piscataway, you know, that's a mouthful. And you have to unpack that, because I lead people back to the 1666 treaty, where it lays out all of the tribes that signed that treaty. It wasn't just one. It just wasn't the Piscataway to sign that treaty, although that's where the Tayak was. So now today we're stuck with that label, Piscataway, irrespective of which one of the villages all along the waterways you may have originated from. Which is why I identify as Choptico, because I trace my matrilineal back to that particular location. So that's how I identify. Because we're diverse communities like any others. You know, it's like motor oil ain't motor oil, and because you're Piscataway doesn't mean that this Piscataway is going to have the same outlooks, inputs as another Piscataway. We're different communities like everybody else's. And hopefully, you know, the Merlin Room in the Hyattsville Library will still be a resource for us, because many of our people don't have the time or the access to go to Annapolis and spend a day there. They have limited resources in terms of staff available to work with you as you come in, unless you have time to sit there. They've done some projects trying to get it, but they saw that they were having issues. They had one in particular called Hitting the Wall. where if you have done as much research as you can with what's available within the state, and you hit a wall, you can't get past that. You could go there and you would have a mentor assigned to you that would help you get past that wall, over it, under it, around it, or whatever. But when I went there, the wall was too high and too wide for to get around on the information that I was trying to secure and working with the mentor, and he was confounded. I used to have a researcher's card with the National Archives. I think maybe I have to renew it, and the Library of Congress. And again, you go there, you've got a mentor. You just don't have open access to those places and the information that they have. So you've got to, before you go to those places, you already have to have done some of your own homework, and hopefully it is significant enough where the person you work with, this mentor, will be able to get on the same page and be able to take you past that wall that you're hitting and trying to get documentation. Of course, in Maryland, the documentation on Native people between 1700 and the 20th century is like finding hen's teeth. Nobody was bothering to document a lot of things. So we have to use circumstances and situations taking place elsewhere, and assuming that the outcome was the same, the methods in getting to that outcome were likely the same. But of course, if you can't prove it, then you've got issues. Without documentation, if it's not on paper, it's like it doesn't exist, and the state will not accept oral history as any proof positive on any level as to what happened, when it happened, or who it happened to. So anything that the library can do as far as maintaining and expanding that Maryland room, the documentation that's available there, would be a great boon to us. Not that Hyattsville is that accessible to everybody, but I think with the modes of transportation that are available in and around this area, more people would have access to it than they would going to Annapolis. I don't think there's any subways running up there yet. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you happen to be aware of perhaps members of your nation or of other nations who may need access and won't be able to visit our facilities, our physical facilities, perhaps we can find a way to facilitate the documents or the resources that they need. We could have a conversation about that.
Yeah, we're in between two good bookends. We've got the beautiful building that's coming up there for the Hyattsville Library. Love that building. I'm glad they didn't get rid of the spaceship. And Maryland University, although you don't, most people outside of the student body don't have ready access to that. I have been in conversations with the head librarian there to see just how maybe some of the material that they have, if they can sort it out. And for those within the tribe that want to do some research, can have some type of access, which is something. One of the things we're working with them. I think I might have already said that on November the 1st, we had a nice opening day. The President Pines was there, and he extended his hand and wants to do whatever he can in order to give greater access to the resources of that campus to our community. So that still needs to be fleshed out. Exactly what does that mean when you say access? I know what we would like to see, but I don't know if that will fly with the Board of Regents or how that's going to turn out.
Well, I certainly hope that it meets your expectations, because I know it's very, very important to open these opportunities for Native American students at the University of Maryland. Just like You mentioned last year how the university is also offering similar spaces to Hispanics, to Asians, to people of other.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, they've made improvements. Just on November the 1st, they did a dedication of the new, what they're calling they have one building that bears the name of the first Asian student that attended Maryland at College Park, the first African American attended, and now they have a building which is going to bear a Piscataway name. Um, so,
oh,
you know,
wow.
they're coming forward with something beyond rhetoric. The dining hall will bear the name. I don't know if I'll be able to go in there and get a meal, but well, it's progress. You know, we have to take it one step at a time. Um, Hopefully that relationship will expand. Um, I've noticed a lot of people in the last couple of weeks showing that many of the universities that are part of the land grant system are starting to reach out to those communities that were impacted by those congressional orders to start these universities, and the fact that they're on native land here. And when I hear people continually say that this building or that building or this institution is on quote unquote unceded land, um, you know, what does that mean? That still has to be fleshed out. What do they mean when they say it's unceded land? It's not like there was a big bad war or something and you obtained it that way. If it's unceded, what does that mean? Uh, Grand Theft Auto, you know, what does that mean, unceded? Do we still have rights to it? The United States does not recognize the treaties that we had with Britain. Now, and I use the analogy that the colonies went through or went into a witness protection program and came out with a new identity and not being held accountable for anything they did in their old identity. With their new identity as Americans, they weren't going to be held responsible for anything that was done under the British regimes or colonial governments. That's the way they have it working. My thing is, if you buy a store, you buy it lock, stock, and barrel. Whatever comes with it is yours. The fire extinguishers, if they don't work, well, they're yours. If the building is full of vermin, it's yours. In this case, these colonies that you're now calling states, you have to consider how you acquired them. Through what mechanism did you acquire these first initial 13 states? It was through these treaties. So to now say we're not going to pay any attention to them, we're not even going to look at them. No, in order to get those kind of things, you have to do it. And we struggled for almost half a century. My generation, I'm standing on the shoulders of others who were pursuing this. And ultimately, we were able to restore the state of Maryland, restore our identity. But nothing came with it. It only in as much as some of the state's regulations, which is one of the things that I use to shove under 3 different governors, that states that in order for you to even register for minority contracting and for other services with the state, if you identify as Native, you have to be a member of a federal or state recognized tribe. So that was a door that was slammed in our face for a lot of years. Gaining state status opened that door to where those who have the qualifications can now go and apply as subcontractors until they prove themselves and meet the criteria to be prime contractors. That's one of the only advantages that we can look at. The federal government has a lot of programs that state tribes can access, and but so far, they ask for so much information. Again, we're back to demographics. They want to know again, incident and prevalence reports, who and how many, so they won't get themselves caught up in something.
Yes.
Um,
And I
so
understand that it's a very costly process too.
it is. It
Yeah.
costs the tribe a little over $800,000 just in fees to pay people because the state will not accept the information coming from you. You have to hire experts, the people with the vitae behind their name that have no dog in the fight. If they're a member of the tribe, then their opinions and whatever it is they write is held suspect. It's questioned. But you get somebody on the outside, you get people that do genealogy, historians, archaeologists, etc. The hourly, you got to pay them by the hour, and they spend a lot of hours in researching. And again, we get back to researching what and researching where. Um, so that's an issue, and that's why it ran the bill up, to a little over $800,000. But at the end of the day, the Virginia tribes went the congressional route because at the point that they stopped, they had exhausted over $1 million. So it's a costly process just to prove who you are. And we're the only people on this planet, or at least in this country, that have to go through that windmill in making that proof. And why? I mean, what's at is there a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow because I'm identifying as Native? No, there is not. Some of the federal tribes are against adding more tribes to it because they think that's going to make the pie smaller as far as federal funds that have become available to fully recognized groups. So there are all kinds of issues mounted up against natives as a distinct group that other groups do not have to contend with.
I understand. And thank you for sharing that very difficult and complex information with us. Thank you, Mr. Newman.
My pleasure.
Our time is almost up. I would like to share the programs that we are offering throughout the month, throughout the celebration of the Native American and Indigenous Heritage Month here at our library system.
Mm-hmm.
For example, we are offering Indigenous Poetry Tweet Along, in that one of our colleagues is tweeting very important Indigenous poetry between November 15th and November 19th. We're having a book discussion, There by Tommy Orange, on Wednesday, November 10th. You're invited to participate as well if you care to do so. We are offering the film The Forgotten Slavery of Our Ancestors on Tuesday, November 23rd. Our independent film series, we are offering The Condor and the Eagle on Monday, November 22nd. And just to make sure we don't have any questions from some of our participants, I want to check in.
Well, before we get into Q&A, you had said something earlier about the school systems and the absence of any icons or anything else that address that issue.
Yes, sir.
It was a group of staff from the museum. We used to go to the schools, and we would put on shows. We would dress in regalia, and we would dance. We had a drummer, etc. I played flute. And we would then go and put on our regular street clothes, blue jeans, sweatshirt. And literally, kids would look around us and ask us, what did you do with the Indians? But we made it our business to go through the school to look to see what was on the walls And of course, you're going to see George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, et cetera, all these icons, and you get to Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, et cetera. But no images of natives. And there was a study done by, I can't think of her name, that dealt with how freshmen in college deal with that transition going from high school into a college and don't know anybody. It's stressful. And I try to imagine, okay, what is the stress level on children that are told and taught that they're native, and when they go into school, there's nothing there that confirms that they acknowledge their existence. Not one picture, anything. And I had one principal tell me, well, who are you going to use? Geronimo don't have anything to do with Maryland Indians. Sitting Bull don't have, it's really? Why not? If that's all you got. I mean, they didn't invent the camera until what, the 1860s? And by then we had been kicked to the curb. Nobody took our pictures back in the day. For some reason, as far as we know, nobody bothered to write papers or anything, and those that we know were obligated to do that, like General Smallwood, trying to find his papers. It's like a needle in a haystack. They've got to exist, but where are they? He was supposed to collect the names of all of the Indians, as he was head of the Rangers at that time, of all of the natives that were in Southern Maryland. And he carried out his duties, at least it states in the state records that he did. So if he did, where are the records? It could help us greatly to be able to find things like that. And hopefully what they're doing at the National Archives might open that up for us.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Newman, we need to finish our program for this afternoon. Are there any final comments that you wish to share with us?
Just one. I received a letter because I'm still one of the old timers in the Hamilton Museum, opened from Kevin Gover the other day, and talking about museums. And it's a great conversation I've had with a lot of people, because you look around the state of Maryland, you find museums with dolls, trains, planes. There's a litany of museums that reflect the history of African Americans in the state, but nothing that identifies anything with natives, except Jefferson Patterson Park, which is down in the hinterlands. Pack a lunch if you go down there, and make sure your headlights work, because it's going to be dark when you come back. So I've been pushing the county. Matter of fact, I couldn't think of a better place for one than next door to you. The community center, which is right there on the corner across from you, is designated. They're going to move up to that old, well, not old, but that bigger building that was a synagogue. In the report that we get in the long-term plan, they're moving that up there because the community is growing in numbers, and they want to get the community center to be able to address the needs of the community. And I've written letters, I've sent emails, etc., and I get crickets as to why not turn that building into a Native American museum that can showcase the history and culture of Indians here in Maryland. You're between a magnificent high school library, you've got Northwestern High School, and I walked to the campus of the University of Maryland, so that's not a hardship for anybody that would be able to come there. And they certainly have students in anthropology, archaeology, museumology, etc., that could make use of that in doing their studies. But I did meet the director of Maryland National Park and Planning at a dedication of a plaque a month or so ago. He gave me his card, told me to get in touch with him, because I told him I had a problem getting answers from anybody. Tell me no, I can deal with that. But crickets, come on. I mean, give me some kind of answer, even if it's no. I even noticed today, walking past there from the post office, there was something else said that they're willing to rent the place out.
I am sorry, I don't have any background information of that community center, but I think that's a fantastic, phenomenal idea to
I
create a
have
music there.
the Maryland National Park and Planning manages it, operates it, and I'm hopeful that I can get a moment with the director for that Maryland National Park and Planning to get his ear and suggest it as an idea. I'm not a museumologist. I'm not looking for a job either. I'm retired. I'm not looking for a job. But I think it would be a fantastic place,
Absolutely.
for the kids. As that elementary school over here behind me in University Park, where by the subway, you've got the university housing. How many of them anyhow would be able to?
Northwestern High School,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind me throwing you under a bus, if I talk to a whole bunch of
Yes.
who might want to weigh in on this being a good idea, because I don't have it. There is a lady who is on the board at Acknowledgement with me. She is a museumologist. Her name is Korn with a K, and that's what she did. Her entire professional life was to teach museumology, and I'm trying to get her to get on the bandwagon with me to see if, because I know what my limit. I don't know anything about museums other than working there as a cultural information specialist, but as a curator, that's outside of my field. But I think that it's due. There's none in the state of Maryland. I even had someone tell me, well, you have the National Museum of American Indian. Why do you need another museum? I said, wow, you got the African American Museum in D.C. Why do you need 8 of them in Baltimore? The argument doesn't wash. The thing is that invisibility has to stop. Somebody's got to turn the lights on. And I can't think of anything better to do that than a museum. And it doesn't have to be one where we're stuck in the past and all you see is wigwams, long houses, and people run around half dressed. I mean, we do live in the 21st century. So it can tell a story, as museums do. And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. With
Okay.
that,
Please let us know how we can help in that process.
Okay, will do.
We'd
Thank
be
you.
happy to do so.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Newman, thank you again for joining us in this very important and lovely conversation. And we hope to see you very, very soon in our new building.
Can't wait. I'll be there. Let me know when they're going to have the inaugural opening and out so I can
Yes, of course. Yes.
cross the threshold.
Okay. Will do. I'll let you know. I'll let you know as soon as I know. Okay. Thank you again. And thank you for all the participants who joined us in this lovely program this afternoon. We hope to see you very soon, and we look forward to seeing you in our other programs that I just mentioned that all our staff members are offering throughout the month of November.
Okay.
See you soon, and thank you again.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.